And we are back once again doing another podcast. We're doing the fifth division of the NBA. We're still in the Western Conference now. This is probably the most interesting division out of all of them because of the contenders. We're talking about the Pacific Division. We have the Lakers, the Clippers, the Warriors, and the Suns, who all next year presumably are going to be contenders. And then we have an up and coming team in the Kings. So we're not gonna wait. We're just gonna jump right into it. I think the most interesting team here is the Clippers because of
Yeah.
Kawhi Leonard. So we're just gonna start with that one right away.
All right. So, in my opinion, the Clippers, the first thing they have to do is make sure they re-sign Kawhi Leonard because without him, they're pretty much nothing.
Yeah,
You know,
definitely.
I'm not
Kawhi
relying on Paul
Leonard,
George.
the whole reason it was okay to trade Shea plus whatever picks they gave for Paul George, because the mindset was that we're trading for Paul George so that we can get Kawhi Leonard. So in a sense, you're trading for both of them,
Yeah,
even though financially that's not what happened. In the sense of logic, in the sense of their logic of why they traded for Paul George, that's why. So if
yeah,
Kawhi is just gonna up and leave now, then you got Paul George for nothing. And Paul George isn't the number one. Like I think that much
no,
is obvious with his last couple years of playoff performance. So
yeah, yeah. I'm not
I,
relying on him for anything.
I mean, he played well this last playoffs though. He gave the Jazz trouble and he played really well. And he had a really good regular season, sorry, as well.
Yeah,
But I feel like they were in a situation where there was no pressure because Kawhi wasn't playing, so he was just able to go out there freely and leave it all out on the floor. But especially next year, because Kawhi is probably not going to play the whole regular season, the pressure is going to be on him. It's going to be interesting to see what happens.
yeah.
But if Kawhi leaves, then all that's out the window because they're going to trade him for sure. I don't see why they keep him.
Yeah, there's no point. Or there's no point. They should just rebuild at that point.
At that point, you just rebuild. I think Kawhi will resign. I think the interesting thing, however, is that he has the player option for 36 million. He could sign that and come back for the 1 year and then re-up next year. I think that's a worse situation for the Clippers though, because if he feels after not playing all of next year, if he feels like okay, I don't want to come back, and he goes somewhere else, then the Clippers could have traded Paul George now, 1 year younger, one extra year on his contract. It would have been more value.
Yeah.
But if he declines the player option and re-ups for a full max contract, it it'd be awesome for them
Yeah.
specifically because they wouldn't have to worry about the future. They'd be locked into their two-star players. I
I
think the
feel
big sorry.
I feel like the next thing they have to do if they re-sign Paul George, not Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, is trade Avery Bradley and get back a nice playmaking point guard to start. Because you have Rajon Rondo and you have Reggie
Avery
Jackson.
Bradley, sorry? You mean Patrick Beverly?
Patrick Beverly, my bad. Yeah. So they need to trade away Patrick Beverly, and that's because they need to trade him to get someone better as a starting point guard, like a better playmaker. Because you have Rondo, but you want him mostly off the bench. I feel like I don't think he's good enough to be a starter anymore, at least not in the regular season. And then
Mm-hmm.
Reggie Jackson is good as a sixth man, in my opinion.
I think Reggie Jackson is good as a six man. I think the issue is how much he wants. And if it gets to a point where it's a Morris type contract, which they overpaid for last year, they gave him 4 years, 64 at the beginning of last offseason. And that was a massive overpay. And if they do that again with Reggie Jackson, they're going to be handcuffed into the
Yeah.
team they have. I think the interesting thing here is that they have those salaries, especially if Ibaka comes back at his $10 million figure next year, because then they have the salaries to put together to make a trade.
Yeah.
Whatever trade they would be to make would have to include Terrence Mann. I don't think that's that big of a deal, however, though.
Yeah.
And they also have another young player who's really a stud in this league in the right situation in Luke Kennard. So it's
For
just
sure.
interesting to see what they're gonna go
They could
do in
even
the future.
package. They could even package Serge and Patrick Beverly.
Yeah, they have a lot they can do. It's just a matter of what the value of these players is because Patrick Beverly at $14 million doesn't have much value. Morris is a bit overpaid. I think Serge Ibaka, if he can stay healthy, has some value,
Yeah.
especially because the league right now, the way it's structured with 3-and-D type players, he can shoot the three at a high clip. He has some range out to the mid range, pick and pop, pick and roll, catch lobs. But I think the big thing is he's a mobile center who can block shots as well.
Yeah.
So if they can bring him back, that'll be huge.
I feel like
And
a
I
few
think,
other, I feel like a
sorry.
few other role players they have to bring back is like Nicholas Batum, right?
Yeah, we were
Because
talking about this. You guys are gonna hear the Northwest podcast where we talked about the Jazz, and Nicholas Batum was the one that broke the Jazz. Well, that adjustment broke the Jazz. I wouldn't say it was just Batum, but
yeah,
part of the problem for the Jazz was that Batum was on the floor. Now, I think that was an anomaly. I don't think that's gonna happen again. And realistically, if Ibaka's healthy, that's Ibaka in that situation, which is even better for the Clippers. So as long as Kawhi is, if as long as they can make some sort of playoff push next year, even a play-in push, and Kawhi is healthy when that starts, the playoff time,
yeah,
I think they still have a chance to be competitive for a championship. But it kind of
for
sucks
sure.
that with his torn ACL, the next year is going to be gone.
Yeah,
You guys are saying that they need a guard. What do you guys think about Mike Conley heading there?
That would
hey,
be awesome. And I
he can
think
go
they
there in a
have the
trade.
players. Yeah, they would need to make a trade, a sign and trade, but I think that would actually be a really good deal because they have the pieces that they can put together to make that deal happen. And that would be a good situation for the Jazz too, because they could move Donovan down to the one. They would have Patrick Beverly, who's a good defender off the bench, and then presumably they get Luke Kennard out of the deal, which is good for them as well. So there's a
Yeah,
lot they could package. That's actually a very good deal.
yeah, I like that. They'll like probably have to give up a first round pick, which I don't know if the Clippers are comfortable doing, but they may have to sacrifice that.
I think
Another one.
if they want to be competitive next year to a point where Kawhi can come back and put them over the top, I think that's the kind of deal they do need to make. Just a second guy that can put the ball in the hole, make plays, and defend.
Yeah.
And I think Mike Conley for a regular season, like he did last year, he was an all-star last year. If he can have an all-star type season again for the Clippers in a hypothetical situation next year, I think that saves them in the future, especially if Kawhi only takes a player option this year, because then Kawhi will want to come back.
Yeah. All right.
I don't
So
think the Clippers have much else we can talk about outside of that. I think another big thing with them is Terrence Mann's 24, which is kind of old relatively for development, but I think there's still a ways he could go, and it's a good situation for them, especially with the playoffs he just had. He played really well.
mhm.
So if you can see some growth from him, there's potential that you don't even have to make a deal for a player like Mike Conley if Terrence Mann can take on that load. But if that's the way you want to go, then you have to make sure you bring back Reggie Jackson at a team-friendly deal, because if you don't, then
Yeah, I could see like a package of
Okay,
Reggie
okay.
Jackson, Patrick Beverly, Terrence Mann, some of those players going to the Jazz for Mike Conley. I feel like that'd be a good trade. I feel like you'd want to do that for the Clippers because I'm not relying on the chance of Terrence Mann improving. I'd rather bank on a solid, like solidified player like Mike Conley who brings in exactly what you need.
Yeah. I think talking about the Clippers, I think the perfect next team to talk about is the Lakers because they're across the hall from them and
Yeah.
because they are rivals right now in LA. I think the Lakers are built, and this is gonna be a bit controversial. I think they're built pretty well, especially if they are able to bring back Schroeder. Again, same thing as Reggie Jackson for the Clippers. They have to hope that he signs a somewhat team-friendly deal and doesn't. I mean, he's not worth the 100 million he was asking for. He was when he asked for it. Now he's not. So if they can get
Yeah.
him back for 4 years 70, 4 years 80 at most, then they can definitely make a run next year. I think the big thing is they have to trade Montrezl Harrell because he's an absolute pylon.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think I think the interesting thing is, and the trade I'm about to propose is for another pylon, but Kevin Love would be interesting, especially if they are able to negotiate in a way where Kevin Love cuts some salary. Trading Harrell and Kuzma with some other pieces could be a good situation to trade for Kevin Love because him and Anthony Davis could play really well together.
For
Same
sure.
way I think that it'd be kind of similar to what Gasol gave them. He's not close to as good a defender as Gasol, but he's a much better offensive player.
Yeah.
So having a Kevin Love off the bench would be very interesting.
And him and LeBron have already played together, so they probably have some chemistry. Some
I
chemistry
mean,
there.
LeBron had the whole when Kevin Love first got to Cleveland, it was the whole fit in, don't try to fit out kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I don't. If LeBron doesn't want to deal with that again, then they'll go a different direction. But it's just we're right now we're just talking about hypotheticals, so it's just
Yeah.
interesting to see what will happen. I think this is the only team that could use Kevin Love though in the league right now. I don't think any other team could really use him. And I think he fits in with what they have, especially if you have a situation where Anthony Davis and LeBron miss some games. If you have Schroeder and Kevin Love with one of the two of them, you can still be competitive in the Western Conference, and you won't be a 7 seed at least in that situation like they were this year.
Are you saying that Schroeder's going to be in the package deal for
Not for
Kevin
Kevin
Love?
Love.
Okay,
If they
yeah,
were to
because
do a Kevin Love deal, they would need to keep Schroeder because that's the one guy they have outside of LeBron that can make a play off the dribble. Obviously, Anthony Davis can as well,
yeah,
but I think
consistently,
consistently. But I think if as long as he can get his jump shot back, like he had in
yeah,
OKC, I think he's actually a really good player. They just need him to get his confidence back, get his jump shot back,
yeah,
and LeBron's not washed yet. He's not the washed king yet. So I expect LeBron, and I mean he's 37, 38 now. So
yeah.
he's getting close to the end of his career.
It'll
But I
be
think
interesting.
LeBron still has at least one more godly season left in him.
Yeah,
And
it's
I'm
be
not I would
really
be
interesting to see what he does this year.
yeah, it's gonna be very interesting to see. But I think there is still the potential. And we're talking about 37-year-old LeBron. So it's a bit of a push, especially because in the regular season, he's going to take a little bit of a break. But when the playoffs hit, there may be a world in which you say LeBron is the best player in the world again. And I don't think anyone would be surprised with that because Kawhi's not there. And Kevin Durant's going to be playing with James Harden and Kyrie Irving next year. Hopefully,
Yeah,
they're all healthy. So Kevin Durant won't. I mean, he's still going to be dominant. He's not going to be as dominant as he is right now because he didn't have Kyrie on the floor. So I think
yeah,
there's a potential for LeBron to be the best player in the world again.
for sure.
Um, a team that has no best players in the world and hasn't ever in their history is the Sacramento Kings. What do you guys think the Sacramento Kings should do?
Man, this team, like as you were talking with me, Param, before this is, you said that they need to trade the two big contracts, Hield and Barnes, right? Barnes is actually pretty good with them, right? I think as a player they could probably keep using him for the future, but Buddy Hield, he needs to get out. He's kind of a problem, right?
Yeah.
He's a huge problem, man.
He's a huge
like,
problem, and the mistake they really, really made. Sorry to take that away from you, Sumeet. I think the mistake they really made is last offseason they made the decision between him and Bogdanovich, and they made the absolute wrong decision in that moment because Bogdanovich, the year he just had with the Hawks, if they had that on the Kings, there is a world in which they make a play and push,
yeah,
and that just didn't happen.
they made the wrong choice there. It's crazy because they trade Buddy Hield for DeMarcus, and they expected him to be a lot better than he is, but he's just been really inconsistent.
That was 4 years ago. Like that's crazy. I think at that time, Buddy Hield was 24, and we're
Yeah,
like, yeah, he has potential to grow. And since then, he had a couple really great shooting seasons, and he had a good shooting season last year too. But I think from the year prior to this last year, he's regressed, and there's a world in which he continues to regress.
yeah,
The positive with a lot of contracts, around the league, including Barnes and Hield, the good thing is on the back end of the contracts, they do get a bit cheaper. So Hield would be making 22, then 20, then 18 the next 3 years. But that's still a big cap hit for somebody that doesn't even really want to be there.
yeah. I don't know why now because he has more of a scoring opportunity.
I think the issue now is that before they had Bogdanovich and Hield fighting for minutes, and now they have Halliburton and Hield
Yeah.
fighting for minutes. And Halliburton is an absolute stud. So you don't want to take away from him. I think Barnes does fit with Halliburton and Fox. So Hield is automatically the odd one out in that situation.
Yeah,
And the good thing is he has value. A team like the Lakers needs a Buddy Hield right now to shoot, to create shots. So if they could get back like a Montrezl Harrell or something from the Lakers, it could be worth their
interesting.
while.
For sure.
Yeah. Speaking on that, Montrezl, he's really good at defense, right? And I think that's one of the things the Kings could probably like really use is they really need to up their defense as well as like a better center to just run with Fox. I think would be ideal because Bagley ain't it. Let's be real.
Yeah.
I think Bagley still has value, and he could still be a coveted asset. I think they should try to move Bagley for some sort of shooting type player.
Yeah.
I don't know where they're going to get that from, considering that his value is at an all-time low right now. But I think Bagley is in a similar situation to Markelle Fultz, where when you strip away what overall pick they were and the situation they're coming from, you have a fresh start. And I think he just needs a fresh start somewhere else.
Yeah.
So it's not over for Marvin Bagley, but it is definitely over for him in Sacramento for sure. And to Bar's point, Montrezl Harrell is a good defender in the pick and roll. He moves his feet pretty well, and he's a pretty good offensive rolling big man. So he could do something similar to what the Clippers did when they made their playoff run before Kawhi and Paul George got there, where Montrez was a huge part of that. He's a sixth man of the year.
Yeah.
But if they want Montrez on the roster, I think they need to go get like an Andre Drummond type, which is interesting because they're both on the same team right now on the Lakers, where they were.
Yeah.
Montrez does have an option for this year.
I don't know if either of those two really help them because they have Rashawn Holmes, Hassan Whiteside, and Damian Jones. So
I think Hassan Whiteside's coming off of his contract.
Yeah, he's not on the contract anymore. You still have Damian Jones and Rashawn Holmes. And I feel like they need a starting center. I feel like Rashawn Holmes needs to come off the bench. He is like their Montrezl Harrell type, but he's better on defense.
Actually, now that I think about it, Rashawn Holmes is actually pretty good. There's a world in which they just start Rashawn Holmes. He's only 27. He has some room to grow still, and he's a very good rebounder, very good pick and roll player.
Yeah.
So as long as they can get something good for a package of, let's say, like DeLon Wright, who doesn't really fit there anymore, and Marvin Bagley, then they could get something back that would help them make a play-in or playoff push next year.
For sure.
Especially because the Clippers, with the current state without Kawhi, there's one more spot for the taking. With the Clippers kind of bouncing out of it. But yeah, there's like with any other team, there's a lot of ways they can go. I think the number one thing they need to do is trade Hield and trade Marvin Bagley.
For sure.
Oh, Bagley. Okay.
Yeah.
I want to also bring a point. I think De'Aaron Fox. I think he needs to step up. Right?
He's really good, but he really does need to step up still.
Yeah, he's just kind of been lacking. I
mean, like this last year he averaged 25 points on about 48% shooting.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I just think with the city he's in, sometimes he falls under the radar a little bit because no one really pays attention to Sacramento realistically. But if Halliburton can take that next step and take some of the load off of De'Aaron, make the game a bit easier for him, man, that backcourt is going to be absolutely lethal in the future.
Yeah.
Yep.
De'Aaron's only 23. Like, people forget. It feels like he's been in the league for a minute. And I said this about John Wall in an earlier podcast where he has the speed of like Sonic the Hedgehog. De'Aaron Fox is right there with him. He may actually even be even faster than John Wall in his peak. Yeah. Because when De'Aaron Fox gets a rebound, man, it's a layup every time. It's insane. And you can build a lot around that. But for you to be able to take advantage of that, like Bar was saying, they need to upgrade at the center position so they can get boards, get stops, and get on transition.
He needs to improve his three-point shooting, De'Aaron Fox. He's shooting 32% this year, because last year in 2021, nowhere near as good as it needs to be to max out his potential.
I mean, I think with his ability to get to the rim, with his speed, with his playmaking chops, if he can just get that to 34.5%, 35%, that's enough for the defense to respect his shot, and that opens up the whole offense for the rest of the team.
Yeah.
One team that does have an open offense and that just made the finals is the Phoenix Suns. What do you guys think the Phoenix Suns have to do? Because in my opinion, I think the biggest thing is to make sure they get Chris Paul locked up for the next 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
I think what he does for that team, and they did at the time we were talking about doing this podcast, they were up 2-0. And we were talking about how they're probably going to win the championship. Since then, they've lost the championship. But realistically, Chris Paul making the finals, I don't see why people are talking about it diminishing his value that he or his well, how would you say
Legacy.
it? His legacy. Based on him losing the finals, I don't think you can say that his legacy got diminished.
Yeah.
But I think making the finals, like it's the same thing with LeBron, where people say he's 3 and 9 in the finals, 3 and 10, 4 and 10 in the finals. That number is complete bogus to me because
Yeah.
making the finals, especially for a player that's never done it before, is a huge feat. That's the furthest he's ever made it, and he was probably the biggest part of that until he got to the finals. At which point he struggled a little bit.
A little bit, but he still came through in the games that they won.
I think the biggest thing for them, since they do have a roster that's locked up, they have Crowder for the next 2 years, Sarge for the next 2 years. Bridges is still on his rookie deal for next year. After that, they have Cameron Johnson still. I think they need to bring back Cameron Payne and Torrey Craig.
For sure.
The biggest thing, and this is what completely killed their chances to win the finals, was they really need a backup big man because
Big guy.
Frank the Tank is more like Frank the Stank right now. He's really not doing anything.
Yeah.
And they really need to make a move because if they can get just all you need really in that situation with a dominant big man like DeAndre Ayton, who's going to play 36 minutes a game,
Yeah.
all you really need is a Dwight Howard type or Marc Gasol type, somebody that can just eat some minutes off the bench. And in those situations, hopefully you don't get completely killed. And especially if they get Marc Gasol or somebody, they won't be getting completely killed in their bench.
Yeah, they just need another body, especially if you go up against someone like Giannis or Brook Lopez, like we saw in the finals.
Yeah, because the minutes that DeAndre Ayton wasn't on the court, and now he struggled a little bit too, but the minutes he wasn't on the court in the finals were the minutes that the Bucks completely destroyed.
Yeah.
And even he got destroyed by Giannis, DeAndre Ayton did. But that's Giannis Antetokounmpo. He's going to destroy anybody anyways. You need another big man off the bench to contend with the Brook Lopez and the Bobby Portises of the world.
Because you saw like with the Raptors, like we were the ones that were able to beat the Bucks pretty convincingly as well, right? So what we had was wing defenders that could guard him, plus bigs to meet him in the paint.
Mm-hmm.
And the Suns had both, but they didn't have a backup big to.
The difference is we had Ibaka and Gasol, whereas they only have Ayton, and they had Sarge, who's okay on the defensive end. He's not a complete minus. He's like a break even, which they could have used at the center spot. But I think if you can get a player that can be a positive impact player off the bench as a center spot, especially only in a 12 to 16 minute time span on the court, I think that's all they really need to make another push to the finals.
Mm-hmm.
The only issue I see there is that Chris Paul is about to turn 37, so their window is about to close, especially because, like a lot of other players that we've talked about over the last few pods and in this pod, Mikal Bridges is on a $5.5 million deal next year, and that's the last year of his rookie scale contract. So after that, you got to pay him. He really played his value up.
Yeah.
And in that situation, you need him to develop to be worth the money he's gonna warrant in free agency. Yeah. But it's hard to build a team when you have that many expensive players on the team.
That's why their window to win is just getting smaller and smaller.
And not to mention, it's not only Mikal Bridges, it's DeAndre Ayton as well. So Ayton's probably going to get $30 million a year starting next year, and then Bridges is going to get at least $20 million a year. So between the four main players that they have, plus Crowder and Sarge, their roster is close to like $120, $130 million a year.
Oh, that's way too much.
Bruh.
Yeah, and that's only for 6 guys, which is half their problem right now. They only have 6 guys. And then after that, you got to pay Cam Johnson as well, because Cam Johnson's 25. He's about to turn 26. And they have a team option on his name for the year after this next season, after which they got to pay him too.
Yeah.
As well as Javon Carter, as well as Jalen Smith. So now is the time. This next year has to be it, or they have to start looking in another direction.
Maybe they can make a trade with the guy that you mentioned, the young center. For his name, what was it?
Jalen Smith.
Yeah, Jalen Smith. Maybe they can put him in a trade with some other people and get a nice backup big, or and maybe another wing or something to help him push him over the edge.
Yeah, yo, you guys saying backup big? Since we just talked about the Kings, what do you guys think about Marvin Bagley going there?
That would be very interesting considering that him and Aiton were from the same draft.
Yeah.
I just think that Bagley is one of those players that has a bit of an ego. So I feel like, especially with how good Aiton has become, I think he was the third best player from that draft.
Yeah.
Most definitely. It was Luca, Trey Young, and then Aiton
For
in
sure.
terms of the rankings. So I think having a Marvin Bagley could work. I feel like he would take away from what Aiton does well, especially because both of them don't shoot threes.
Yeah, they need
That's true.
spacing.
But
All
that's an
right.
interesting prospect for sure. Like they have the pieces to get a Marvin Bagley, and they have the pieces that would entice a team like the Kings, especially involving a Jalen Smith and a Javon Carter and a Cameron Payne, possibly a Cameron Johnson, who I wouldn't trade personally. I think he's a stud.
Yeah.
But they have the pieces to make a move.
All right. So the final team, the Warriors, probably the most interesting team in my opinion because of the circumstances that they're in. I feel like the biggest like what's it called variable here is Klay Thompson because you don't know what he's gonna be when he comes back, and you don't know when he's gonna come back. So it's just very weird.
I think with Clay, the interesting thing is shooters shoot. Klay Thompson's one of the greatest shooters ever. I don't see a world in which he shoots less than like 38, 39% from three. He's
Yeah.
probably going to shoot like 42, 43% from three this next year because that's just who
Uh-huh.
he is. But I think the real issue with the Klay Thompson injury is how it's going to affect him on the defensive end.
Yeah.
Now, with modern technology and modern advances in health, a lot of players have come back better from those types of injuries. Kevin Durant, as namely the one of them,
Yeah.
who came back from an injury like that and had an absolute stellar year this last year. But Klay Thompson's coming off of two of those injuries. He had a torn ACL as well as a torn meniscus. So it's just going to be interesting to see how he is on the defensive end. The good thing is that Andrew Wiggins did make strides on that end of the floor.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting also to see what they do with Steph Curry because he's getting $46 million this next year, after which he's a free agent.
Yeah. I feel like they're just gonna do whatever they can to bring him back. But the biggest move that the biggest decision they have to make is what they're gonna do with Andrew Wiggins and James Wiseman, because there's been a lot of talks about trades between with them and the Wizards and other potential trade pieces that stars that aren't necessarily where they want to be. And it'd be interesting to see what direction they go with that.
Yeah. It's also interesting because they have the pieces to make a trade. I think they need to try their best to bring back Kelly Oubre, not because he's a great basketball player, because he's not. He's mediocre at best right now. But just so that you have a contract to trade along with Wiseman and Wiggins. Because if you could make a package of Wiseman, Wiggins, Oubre, and possibly like a Nico Mannion who has some value, you could get back a lot for it.
Yeah.
And they're one of, again, another team. I'm not going to go down this road again because, Bradley Beal is being traded to every team, presumably right now by everybody. Like everybody thinks he can go to any team. But this is, again, another one of the realistic ones that can make an offer because they have a Nico Mannion and a James Wiseman and a Kelly Oubre that the other team may want. What do you guys think about that?
Well, it can really change their trajectory, and at the same time, they have to see again. That depends on Klay's health, right? Because you don't know what exactly you'll need. You don't know if you'll need more scoring, but for the most part, whatever they get, it should be a big man.
Yeah,
right?
I think
Some kind of
a big man could help them too. But if they were to go the route of trading for a big man, I think they would just go ahead and keep James Wiseman because he does the things they need him to do. As long as he can make improvements on the defensive end, because he really did struggle. He has the potential on that end because of his length, his height, his athleticism. And then on the offensive end, he doesn't have to do much right now outside of catch lobs.
Yeah.
Really. And he has one of the best players for that in Steph Curry. But they definitely, I think, have to trade Andrew Wiggins just to get another stud piece, especially because his shots are going to Klay Thompson next year.
Yeah, he's not going to get the same touches.
Yeah, and he can't expect the same touches either. And they're honestly, there is a world where they just stay put and keep their roster the way it is and just make some moves to upgrade their bench
Yeah,
because they have a pretty solid roster right now. They're pretty deep in terms of the players they have. And if you look at their roster, they're not really lacking anywhere, I would say, outside of the center position. They would just need really a backup big man, somebody that can teach James Wiseman how to play the position. I think the absolute perfect player. And again, this is another two players that get put with any team when they need a backup big man. It's Dwight Howard and Marcus Gasol.
Yeah.
But the reason I say those two is because they're both defensive player of the years. They're both defensive studs at throughout their careers. So they could teach James Wiseman the way as well as anchor the defense when he's not on the floor.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And then the final thing I really want to talk about before we end the podcast with the Warriors specifically is Eric Pascal, because he's pretty good. And he's, again, another player that's going to be on the last year of his rookie scale deal. And his is very cheap because he was a second-round player.
Yeah.
But he's making 1.8, after which you would assume he's going to get anywhere in the realm of $10 to $15 million.
I mean, he did technically regress from 14 points a game to about 9.5.
But that, honestly, you can't really read too much into that, especially because they didn't have Klay Thompson on the floor to create space for him, as well as Stephen Curry kind of got fed up with everyone and started just shooting more.
Yeah.
And Andrew Wiggins took a large chunk of the shots.
That's true.
But I think in a six-man role, if they want to make a push this year, they need Eric Pascal to give them whatever you said, like a 12. If they can get 12 points per game out of him, especially in the playoffs, that's all you really need as long as he's efficient.
Yeah.
And that's honestly, he's 24. You can't really expect much more from him. I think throughout his career, he's just going to be a six-man scorer, and that's perfectly fine. There's players that have made lives off of that kind of style. I'm not going to say Manu Ginobili because he's an actual star that could have been a superstar anywhere. He just decided to do that. I think the names that come to mind here are more of the Lou Williams vein of player. Now he's a big man, so it's a bit different, but it's the same thing in the sense of the role that he'd be playing as a scoring player.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Warriors definitely are one of the more interesting situations. And this whole division as a whole, because you have four contenders in this division, like real contenders. I would say two of them are real contenders next year, the Lakers and the Warriors. The Clippers kind of fell out of that because of the Kawhi injury. And then you have the Suns, who just made the finals. And with the Clippers bouncing out of it because of the Kawhi injury, they have the chance to propel themselves back into that situation.
Yeah. All right.
I don't think I have much else to say for these teams. So it's been real. You guys have a good night.
Hey, guys. Thanks for tuning into today's pod. Shout out to Kaiser Draws for the logo and YouTube banner. And huge shout out to Vic.Ash for the music. Links for the pages will be in the description below. Once again, thanks for listening. Like, comment, and subscribe for more YouTube content.